Welcome back to another episode of Close to Broke. Today, doing something a little different for myself, but something that's definitely in line with the brand Close to Broke. I'm going to be heading over to play a home game, something that I'll go into depth about why I don't really care for, but why I'm ending up doing it anyways, really. But nonetheless, not going to keep you guys longer than I need to. Let's get to this game. What the absolute fuck just happened? Let's get into it. Before we get into today's video, you know I always have to do this for you guys. There is one little surprise for y'all. Ooh, look at my little baby. This is my son. A little hairy, I know, but yes, he is my son. His name is Milk, or Leche. So, enough of the cringiness. That's my child. We're gonna let him be. We're gonna let him just relax and enjoy himself down low. Okay, all that getting out of the way. One more time, like, comment, subscribe, all that. I want to talk about a couple of big hands that just happened to me. Very first hand of note. We're playing 10-25 and we're playing 5-handed when we get to the game. And quickly we get down a heads up with a rec player. Nothing of note before the heads up match began. My own version of the Doug pull versus Danny Negreanu game. The heads up challenge started really. We're playing 10-25 like I mentioned. To be fair, it's 5-10-25, but the button's just a 25 mandatory straddle at this point. So the straddle is on. I'm in the big blind and I look down at pocket kings, 2 red kings. I go ahead and raise it to 75 and the button decides to call. The flop is 9-3-3 rainbow. On a board so dry, I don't mind going really any way with it, so a check or a c-bet. But in this position, I'm totally happy with making this one of my c-bet hands. And the reason being, this is a nice hand to c-bet with. I'm going to be definitely, with the sizing that I choose, as you guys will see now, I decided to bet $60. So by betting about 40% pot, I leave my range as wide as, some may say, as open as the ocean, as completely wide and open as the ocean. And his calling range should stay just as wide. He decides to make the call. We go to the turn, which is an 8, an offsuit 8. So we have the full blown rainbow, Lucky Charms kind of things. And I go ahead and bet $120 here. He goes ahead and makes the call. So with the little bit of understanding we know at this point, some of the hands that he's going to have here are very weighted to top pairs. If he has a hand like 9-8, which is a counterfeited 2 pair, that's even better for me. But it doesn't seem like he's going to be folding anytime soon. Seems like he has some form of value. We go ahead and make it to a river, which is a 4. All these straight draws that came on the turn now miss. And pretty much no hands besides top pairs and second pairs are in this situation. So I go ahead and decide to polarize myself here. I decide to polarize myself because of one big factor that I talked to the C2B boys about earlier. And that's that people that don't play this game for money, that are recreationals obviously, that are not here to become professional poker players, think like so. My top pair is worth X amount of money. They don't think of it like, oh, is my hand like a 2x pot? Like, whoa, it has to be really good. It's a 2x pot bet. Recs usually think like my top pair is worth X amount of money. So like I decide to bet $600 here. In the pot, I go almost two times the pot size here. And I'm doing that obviously on purpose because I'm targeting his hands like top pair and second pair. Although those hands almost more frequently will like to call a more smaller, like a much smaller and a more orthodox size bet, which is going to be around that 60 to 75% mark. Definitely more likely to call. But in my read of the player and the opposition. And again, this is where exploitative and GTO find that perfect middle ground, which is when you deviate from the GTO, what the game theory optimal tells you. And I like throwing hands like this, pocket kings, not so polar on my range, but mixing it into that range and polarizing it by betting it this size. I'm not concerned about any trips here. I would have heard about that on the turn of the flop by getting raised, check raised at that, and I didn't. So again, I'm pretty fine here. And if he just happens to have like pocket fours and call down, good for you. So decided to bet $600 and he tanks for quite a bit of time. And by quite a bit of time, I mean like some time passes by and he decides to make the call. I show my pocket kings and we're good. He quickly decides to tell me that he called with an ace high and he thought I was bluffing. So obviously my sizing was good. Maybe if I bet a little smaller here, he decides to fold. But obviously, if he's willing to call with ace high, a 2x, pot bet on the river, I love throwing kings into that range as well. And one note that I will say, having kings in that situation is significantly better than having pocket aces. And the reason being is I double block kings, any kings here. The last thing you want to be doing is double blocking a hand as strong as aces in this, or as strong as ace high in this situation. If he's willing to call off with ace high here, hand like aces wouldn't make sense in my situation to be bluffing on the river with. We'd like for him to have those in his range distribution. So all that being said, really like my sizing. It's a really creative way to play the hand. And yeah, it was a good time. Obviously, I won. So, who cares? Who doesn't like that? So the very next hand of note here we're going to discuss is a hand where I look down at 7-8 offsuit, 8 of clubs, 7 of diamonds in the straddle, $25 on the button. The big blind decides to limp in and I make it $80 as an isolation and he calls. The flop is 9-6-4 with 2 diamonds. He goes ahead and checks it to me, playing in flow, and I decide to bet $60. Without too much thinking, he decides to raise to $175. At this point, with 8 high, I'm sure a lot of people will say, I'd love to take the pot down here and raise, and getting all in for like 150 big blinds effective, 200 big blinds effective on the flop with 8 high is just never fun, right? I'm like never getting called and think it's a slam dunk, obviously. So with all that being said, I'd like to realize my equity and just call here. The turn is a beautiful offsuit 5. I mean, can't ask for a better card. We have the absolute nuts here. He goes ahead and bets $175 once again. In this position, I don't think there's much else to do besides extract some extra value, and I go ahead and do just that. I raise it to $425, and again, without much thinking, he almost snap calls. The river is one of the worst cards in the deck, probably. It's another 5. It's fun to get there, but it's kind of weird when you get there twice and it kind of changes the entire texture of the board. He goes ahead and checks it to me again, and I decide to get some thin value, and I bet $400, and he almost immediately folds. But just because I won the hand doesn't mean I couldn't have played it any better or any worse. The one thing I definitely want to note here is that I don't know what my bet on the river is accomplishing besides not having to show my hand down, honestly. I don't really know what kind of hands he's going to call with. Like, I don't even think even how aggressive and wide this guy plays, I don't even think top pair is good enough to call in this river run out in the way I played the hand. Yeah, honestly, I don't love my river bet. I don't know what I can get called by that's worse. So just because you have a good hand doesn't mean it's like a smart idea to just start, throwing bets out. So, I mean, honestly, I think that's a check back. It's different when I'm in position. I'd like to be out of position just for the river so I could check and watch what he does. And then obviously my hand's just a check call. So yeah, just food for thought. It's important to know that even when you win a hand doesn't mean you played it the right way. And this is the one time where I don't like my river bet. I don't even know why I bet on the river. It just doesn't make any sense. I don't know what I'm accomplishing. So before we get into my very last hand, which is actually more fun than the last time I did the last hand, I do want to again thank you guys all for supporting the C2B. The community is growing drastically at this point. It's just every day exponentially growing. Anyways, let's hop right over to BJ and Christian. Let's see how their previous sessions have gone down at the bike.
Okay guys, so we've been playing 2-3 at the bike, and this is over the past 3 sessions. We've been doing pretty well. We booked 3 wins, so I'm gonna go over a couple hands. This one's from the first session, and we had just sat down at the table. Maybe a couple hands have gone by, and we pick up kings under the gun +1. So under the gun had flatted. We make it 15 with kings. A middle position player calls, the small blind calls, the big blind calls, and the under the gun player who flatted also completes. The flop comes Jack 10-5 with 2 spades, and I'm holding a spade. So I c-bet for 30% pot, and I want to be able to do this to keep my range really wide. Having 5 people in the hand, is interesting. Like, I don't know how often I'm good here, but I'm definitely gonna be betting this, and I want to be able to bet my range often with a smaller sizing. So I bet, and the hijack is the only player to call, and he has the biggest stack at the table, and he has been bullying people. I just seen him finish a pot where he bullied somebody off what appeared to be the best hand, and he's been a very aggressive player at the table. So the turn is an 8 of spades, and I check to him. I probably could have just continued there because it's a good card for me. I obviously hold the spade, the king of spades. I think a lot of times I'd be continuing there, but I decided to check to him just because of how aggressive he is. And he bets out for 70. I call. And I really like having I'm obviously calling any bet here because I have the king of spades. So if another spade comes out, I'm going to be calling a lot. But I like having the king here rather than the ace because he can be barreling with a lot of just ace of spades, maybe ace of spades in a pair, maybe just the ace of spades. And given his player profile, I think that he's very likely to take advantage of as many bluff spots as he can, especially with his big stack as well. So he bets out for 70 on the turn. I call. The river is just an offsuit 4. And once again, I check to him. He just slides his rack in. He slides about 500 in. I have about 180, 190 behind. For the reasons I said, I don't have the ace, but I do block spades. I think that he's really aggressive. I think I'm almost kind of under-repped as well. I decide to make the call, and I show over my kings. He shows over 9-10 for a pair with a busted open-ended straight draw. So we scoop a really nice pot. We double up our first hand played at the table, which is a pretty good start. In this hand, 2 middle position players call, pretty weak players, and he makes it 10 in the cutoff. So he makes a really small raise, and I'm on the button with ace-10 off. Now I know I should be raising here, and I don't. I decided to flat. Thinking back, obviously you need to be ISO. I like ISO raising here, but I decided to flat. The other 2 players complete, which is obviously not what we want. The flop comes 9-10-3 rainbow, and the 2 players check. He bets out for 30, and I call, and we go heads up to a turn. The turn is a 4, completes the rainbow on the board. So we have a rainbow board. It's 10-9-3-4. And he bets big. He bets out 85. And I think for a second, given that he just won a pot, he has a huge stack, he seems like a fairly aggressive player, I'm going to go ahead and call again with top air, top kicker. And the turn's a pretty good card for me. So I call. The river is a 5, and he checks. I think here's a really good spot to go for thin value. I think I had a pretty good read on this player. I think that he probably has some sort of marginal made hand for value and likes to play kind of like big stack poker. And I'm still fairly new at the table, and I think he just thought he was going to get it done with a couple barrels. But when he checks, I think he's pretty weak, but I think he's also strong enough to call a bet. Me with top pair, top kicker, I think I can go for thin value here. I decide to just check back, and I show my ace-10, and he mucks. He says good kicker, so I assume he had a 10-2. It could really go either way. I think a lot of times if we bet for value there, he's going to be calling, and we're going to be good a lot. But then sometimes he's also going to be turning over jacks, probably just about jacks. Yeah, so that I believe that was a missed opportunity for a little bit more value. But we were good in that hand, and he was really aggressive, and he kind of bombed the turn, so we got some good value off that hand. Okay, so this hand is from the following session, and we're playing 6-handed, and we were playing 6-handed for most of the night. There were a couple pretty good players at the table. The gentleman to my left is an older player, and he seems like a pretty good player. And then there is a kid a couple seats behind us who's also a pretty good player. And they're going to be involved in the next 2 hands I go over. This first one, playing 6-handed, and under the gun, who is that older gentleman that I was talking about that is a good player. He raises to 15. The button calls, the small blind calls, and I'm in the big blind with king, queen off. And I decide to call. I guess I can raise there sometimes, but I'm okay with a call here. The flop's gin. The flop is ace, jack 10, so we just flop the joint. The small blind checks. I check, under the gun continues for 35. The button folds, the small blind calls, and then I obviously call. So we go three-way to a turn. The turn is the 7 of clubs. There's no flush draws on the board. It's a rainbow flop. The small blind checks, and I decide to bet out here for $80. And we talked about this, and I think a lot of times, I'm afraid of missing value on the turn, especially when I have the nuts. I want to be leading out here. But on this flop specifically, under the gun is likely to be really strong. I think when I was playing, I had perceived him to be very strong as well. So I think this hand plays better as a check raise. And we all talked about it here at C2B, and we think the same thing. I mean, they think the same thing, that it should probably be a check raise. But I decided to lead out for 80. I was afraid of missing value. And under the gun calls, the small blind calls as well. And I have about 200 behind. The effective stack is a small blind to my right, with now about 140 behind. The river was a king. So there's ace, king, jack, 10 on the board. The river's a king, and I jam, I know this is gonna be an action killer for us. And under the gun, obviously, is a huge hand, shows the guy to his left. He knows he's beat, and unfortunately, he throws his hand away. The small blind calls for his remaining stack, and we flip over our king, queen, and we're good. But yeah, once again, we really missed out on value, I think. I think we definitely could have gotten under the gun stack if we just decided to go for a check raise. But me being afraid of missing value, I think ended up costing me more value. It's close because small blind called anyway, and maybe if I check and somehow under the gun bets larger than I did, maybe he gets a fold out of small blind. But I think a lot of times under the gun's gonna bet after I check, small blind's still gonna call, and then I'm gonna check raise jam, and I might even get 2 callers there. I think we missed out on value there, but we still took down a pretty sizable pot, which was nice. The next hand we play was with the young kid, and I raise under the gun, 6-handed, with ace-10 off, and it folds to the kid in the small blind. And I've seen him play at this table. I've been sitting here for a couple hours now. He knows when to ISO raise, and he's doing it very often. He's doing it somewhat mechanically. So I know he's got a wider 3-betting range than most players at the 2-3 game, because I know he knows what he's doing. I think that his range can even go down to like king jack off. So he raised to 45 in the small blind. I have about 500, 550 behind, and I don't want to just call here because he could easily have better aces and I can easily miss. I am in position, but I decide to 4-bet and turn my hand into a bluff, and I put out a bet of 130. Now, if he comes over the top of me, because he also has a fairly large stack, he has about 600. If he comes over the top, obviously I'm gonna be folding here, but he decides to just flat. And out of position, I'm happy to go to a flop. My hand looks really strong. And the flop comes 3, 4, 8, and he checks to me. And after making it 130, I have about 320 behind. So I cut out a bet of 85, and he tanks and folds, asks us if we had aces, and he said he had ace king. So over 3 sessions, the first session we were in for 300 and we were out for 705, 704. The next session we were in for 300, out for 590. And the final session we were in for 300, out for 789. So it was a pretty good tear over 3 sessions. And we'll take it to BJ or Kiran.
So we play the 2-3 game at the bike, play for a good 8 hours. And I just want to talk about one hand specifically. I have ace queen offsuit on the big blind. We have an under the gun straddle, the middle position and button complete, as well as a small blind. I plan on raising. I make it 40, which is a little over pot. It folds around to the button calls. The button is a recreational player, and with these kinds of players, they're very predictable in their bets, their bet patterns. They bet their solid hands, and obviously they attack on weaknesses. It feels like, especially when you're checking, or when you've shown interest in the pot and then you've kind of lost interest, which is kind of how my hand plays out. So the flop comes king 10 8, and I decide to c-bet for $30. The button ends up calling, and on the turn pairs the board with another 10. There's no flush draws out there. I decide to check and the button checks behind. So at this point, I think ace queen is pretty good. I'm just looking to get to showdown. I feel like he's not that strong. I feel like kings do bet on the turn. I feel like sometimes even these kinds of players, they do raise me on the flop, which is fine because I'm fine folding ace queen or even seeing the turn and hopefully hitting that jack or seeing a card that would affect him and maybe turn into a bluff on the river. But anyways, the river comes 3x. I end up checking and the guy just immediately puts in $100. And so the pot is around 150. He puts in 100 and I tank for a while. With the paired board, I mean, what he can really have here, I feel like, is a 10. I don't think he checks the turn with a king, and I think he has a lot of bluffs here. And I do block those bluffs, I understand that, but with this read I have, these kinds of players, they make these just drastic, weird moves where they're like, oh, I sense weakness, I'm gonna attack it and I'm gonna bet $100. And that's what it felt like he was doing. I end up calling and he shows jack 7 and we take it down with the ace high. So that was the last session that I had, and it was about an 8-hour session, and there were a lot of hands that happened. I didn't get to record them, and I didn't think they were all that necessary. I felt like it was a lot of pre-flop raising that I did, and there was just a lot of folding that was going on. So we end the session after 8 hours, down $125. We had grinded it from about 625 down.
So a little bit of a harsh transition there, but BJ just wrapped up his session, and we're going to be heading over to finish up my session at the home game to discuss the very last hand of note, which is a pretty crazy one. But without further ado, last hand in our session that I want to go over is a fun one. Again, I'm on that button with a $25 straddle. The big blind decides to make it $80. I look down at queen of diamonds, 5 of clubs. I go ahead and make the call. The flop is king, king 3 with 2 diamonds. He goes ahead and c-bets for a smaller sizing here of $60. First time he's chosen to go for a smaller sizing. I don't know really what to make of it, if I'm being totally fair. It could just be a c-bet. It could just be that somehow he's playing GTO now and deciding to merge, make an IC betting range on a board that's fairly dry, if I'm being fair. With all that being said, I don't think I can throw away a backdoor second nut flush draw, as well as the simple fact that queen high just might be good here a decent amount of the time as well. And my pairouts might be live if that's not good enough. So I go ahead and make the call. The turn is a 5. He goes ahead and bets $125 on the turn. I think in this position now, he obviously has some kind of hand for value, it seems like. And if not, if he's still bluffing, that's great. I don't need to scare him away. I don't need to overplay my hand. But I'm definitely not folding if I'm calling on the flop or floating on the flop to cash a pair, right? So I go ahead and make the call. The river is an absolute miracle gin card. It's another 5, so we've backed our way into a boat. And he goes ahead and checks it to us at this point. Couple of really important things to note now. By checking on the river, he can almost never have a king here. And the reason I say that is because he's an extremely, extremely aggressive recreational player. And there's almost no reason for him to bet on the river at this point. He has the absolute nuts. We're playing a 10-25 game. I haven't shown any propensity to overbluff in this situation. And obviously, in his eyes, I think if he had a king, I'd be calling most hands because the board hasn't changed much from the flop, if I'm being totally fair. So with all that being said, I decide to think it over for a second and I decide to polarize myself here. I decide to bet $800 on this river. And again, the reason being is that I like polarizing myself in spots that maybe other people wouldn't think about. But this just seems like a blatant spot. He just doesn't have a king, but he has some form of value. And there's 2 kind of like buckets that his hands fall into. Absolute dumpster trash that he's just never calling any bet sizing to. Even if I induce, I don't think he can turn his hand into a bluff here. And then decent hands for value like aces, queens, jacks, 10s that are going to be calling almost any bet sizing. And as I mentioned earlier, Rex almost never look at it as like, oh, he's betting 2 times pot. That means he has to have a super polar range. I think they're thinking along the lines of, I'm almost certain that they think along the lines of, is my hand worth $800? Anyways, my huge bet gets this guy in the tank. And when I say in the tank, I mean in the tank. It was so insane how long he was in the tank that somebody that was watching the table called the clock on this guy. Think about that. Some onlooker, which by the way, in no way is that right. Like, screw you, dude. But pretty funny if I'm being fair. An onlooker called the clock on him. But anyways, after quite a bit of tanking, he decides to make the call. Obviously, we're good here. We show our queen 5, and he is disgusted. Rightly so. Sorry, man. You obviously had a better hand than me on the flop, I guess. Maybe. I don't really know. Considering you called me with ace high on the first heads up hand that we played that of no. Who knows? But anyways, that wraps it up for my session. In for 2,000, out for exactly $4,000. All in all, a pretty great session for all of the boys. For us all to ring off a couple of wins is a good feeling. And for BJ's session especially, you know, being down 2 binds in a game and bringing it all the way back to only being down a third of 1 bind is pretty outstanding. So big ups to him. Christian improving his play as well, getting better, realizing some spots and learning from himself is big too. And for myself, pretty wacky little session. It's hard to complain about doing well and running well, and then especially when you're overbetting and they all seem to work. So really happy about all that stuff. But nonetheless, gonna quickly thank you guys all dearly for supporting the channel. Make sure to click the like button down below, as well as all the other good stuff. Notification bell is important. Quickly, I'm gonna show you guys. So we went ahead and paid out all the people that supported the channel. We have 3 winners of the giveaway. We're gonna keep doing these. It's fun. It's free money. It's you know, it is what it is. So Andre, we went ahead and paid Andre. Let's pull up if I can get. So there we go. The 3 people we paid out. Let me see. I gotta get this better. I'll throw it on the screen or something. I'll figure it out. But Corey, as well as Vincent and Andre, you guys all won $33. Your piece of the $100 giveaway. I'm going to keep doing these away. You know, I'm not going to be giving away like ACR $20 bullets and poker badges. You know, and I don't mean any disrespect to anyone. That's cool. If I can give away a little bit, you know what? Screw it. Why not, man? Hopefully you guys can buy a bag of hot Cheetos or something with it. Until the next time, it's the entire C2B family. We love you all dearly. I wish the boys were here with me finishing up this edit so I can get them to say goodbye. But nonetheless, we'll see you guys on the next episode. Should be a blast. And as always, I'll see you guys on the flip
I should have
side.
known when I met her back at Midtown, at Dogwood, when I was going through a rough patch, but it's all good. I even told about the dark times I had in childhood when we was driving off of I-10 in Kirkwood. Now all that time I never get it back. You wanted that, used to hate when I didn't want to hang. I noticed that, used to talking about your ex Jake with your next Jack. Used to messing with them white boys, now she went black. Wait a minute.